part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
Welcome to Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. We're your hosts, Maggie and
Nicole.
Welcome to our 8th episode where we will be talking about the film The Promise. We've both been meaning to watch this film for years, but it recently went up on Netflix, at least within the US, and we thought that it was the perfect time for us to watch it.
But before we start talking about The Promise, and there's plenty to say about it, we wanted to talk about some very exciting things that have happened recently. We've had some exciting news happen since our last episode. One of the things that we wanted to talk about, as we're both huge Taylor Swift fans, is the release of Folklore, Taylor's album that she kind of spontaneously dropped on us.
Quarantine creatives.
You know, King Lear was written by Shakespeare while he was quarantined. And Folklore was written by Taylor Swift while she was quarantined, and I think that's beautiful. Take from that what you will.
And honestly, it too is a masterpiece.
It's, I think, one of her best albums, easily.
Yes.
I still haven't fully decided if it's my favorite album, because that feels like a huge betrayal to Red.
You see, Reputation's like my heart and soul. I turn that one, like, I'll listen to Folklore and they'll be like, all right, it's time for some Rep Tour. Like, I actually have my Rep Tour hat sitting next to me right now.
And I'm a Red girl. I feel like that says it all, honestly, about us. Like, if you had to pick an album for each of us, I feel like that's probably what you would pick. Folklore is so good.
It's magical.
It's like every song on it is a masterpiece. There's only a couple that I don't really care for. And even those, I still
August
like
is hit
them.
or miss. Like August and 7 are like weak for me, but they're not.
I love
skips.
August. I love August so much, but I don't like 7.
I don't like 7 either, but it's still not a skip. I still like, I'll listen to it.
It's just like, I'm not jamming the same way that I am to some others, but I know a lot of people love 7. So
yeah, people relate to it, and you know, that's what's important.
Right. But do you have a favorite track or a favorite 1 or 2?
Exile.
That makes sense.
Probably my favorite. I like to think that it has a lot of like Bronte vibes to it. It's
gonna say it's the Bronte vibes.
It's the Bronte vibes. Also allegedly written by Joe Alwyn.
Oh my God.
There is no confirmation, but I am into that Swiftie theory.
Oh yeah. I think my favorites are Cardigan, and I don't think I've ever had it where the lead single was my favorite song before. I don't think that's ever happened. But then also, I think the bonus track, The Lakes, might be my favorite song.
The Lakes really made me miss the Lake District.
Yeah. I also feel like I truly think that Taylor as a lyricist is like one of, if not the greatest poet of our generation. So
wholeheartedly
there's
agree. Something
so fitting about her singing about this topic and talking about poets, and when she refers to, you know, what's obviously Jo Alwyn as her muse, like,
yes,
that gets me, man. I feel like the whole Folklore album has a very vintagey, like, period drama feel to it.
Yes.
Like, there's so many tracks that I was like, I would like for this song to inspire a whole period drama movie.
Yes.
Like, I want the film, actually, like, I want the musical, like the Broadway show of The Last Great American Dynasty.
Oh my gosh, yes. Can we please get that?
I've been wanting Taylor to write a musical for years. I want her to do something like Sarah Bareilles did Waitress.
Taylor and Andrew Lloyd Webber team up.
Boom.
Done.
Boom.
You heard it here first, folks.
If only.
Hey, I'm just saying, Andrew Lloyd Webber did tweet about the album release.
He did. It was a beautiful tweet.
Honestly, the merging of two of my favorite things.
That was very much like Nicole and Maggie bait right there. So there's some other news that I feel like we were both pretty excited about.
Yes, so super excited about the vice president pick. Kamala Harris is a fantastic pick. Ironically, like 2 years ago, I had a tweet where I was like, I would go for like a Booker Harris team up. And I was like, so close. I was so close.
Yeah.
But, it's so important. I feel like this election is truly a defining point in our generation. I feel like coupled with what's going on with the coronavirus, the mass economic downturn, and just kind of where the world is right now, I feel like if our generation, the generation that's just slightly below us that are able to vote, and, the generations everywhere else along the spectrum don't get behind this and vote this year, I feel like the next 4 years and the path moving forward is going to be a very dark times, which is, very kind of dreary to talk about on a podcast, but it actually, in a lot of ways, I feel like sets the tone also for what we're going to be talking about in terms of like being a change and recognizing patterns in history, and trying to stop them.
I feel very lucky because I will be honest, she was who I was supporting back in the primaries for the presidential pick. So
she was like my number 2.
Yeah. And I mean, Maggie and I, to anyone listening, are fairly politically aligned.
Yes.
So I feel very lucky that she was chosen. And also the fact that she was chosen makes me feel a lot better about Joe Biden as a presidential nominee, particularly because I think that she's someone who will challenge him and encourage him to, maybe not have the viewpoints that we would expect of someone of his age, of his, whatever. And it's really exciting to see a woman on the ticket who is, not only female, but also she's half Black, half Indian.
Yes.
Her parents, were Jamaican and Indian. I think that's so exciting to see that. And I'm really happy for everyone who is kind of getting to see themselves maybe on a presidential ticket for the first time. And all of this is to say, make sure that you're registered to vote. Make sure that you're requesting absentee ballots if you can.
Yes.
They're saying that probably the best course right now would be to request an absentee ballot and then drop it off in person. Don't mail it because of all the issues going on with the postal service. But if you can go and drop it off, then that's probably the safest way to do it, both in terms of making sure that your vote gets there and gets counted and also being safe during the pandemic.
And also look into your local polling location. I know at least in my area, they are talking about extending early voting as well as allowing for private voting. So that you're the only person in that space when you go in to vote, to try to make it more accessible for people. So definitely, look into what is in your area and vote as early as possible.
Yeah, make sure that you make your plans, vote early, and make sure that you get out and vote because if you look at the numbers from the last election, if more people had voted, we might not have ended up where we are now. And I think that we've all seen with the way that this pandemic has been handled, but the fact that our postal service is currently under attack, that something's got to change or we're going to have more dark times ahead. And I would love for 2021 to be a better year than 2020.
And, I saw a TikTok, I know TikTok, but I saw a TikTok the other day from someone who was talking about how, there are a lot of people who are still, quote unquote, on the fence because their Democratic nominee didn't make it to the finish line. And maybe they aren't happy with, the candidates that we have and, this choice that has been made. But perfection is the enemy of the good. There is no such thing as a perfect candidate. And it's really just a matter of knowing that this will open the right doors moving forward and will hopefully galvanize a future that is a better one than how things look right now.
Absolutely. Joe Biden
is not
would
perfect.
Not be my first choice. He wouldn't be my pick, but at the same time, we spent the past almost 4 years saying that we would vote for anyone but Trump. I love to joke, like, I would vote for this bottle of Advil over Donald Trump. So if I've said that, I think I have, you got to go vote for, if you don't want to think that you're voting for Joe Biden, just think that you're voting against Trump, if that helps you.
That's all that matters at this point.
Yeah. I like that we were like, let's have a little bit of chit chat before we get into this very heavy topic.
20 minutes later.
Somehow we ended up getting into another heavy topic before we get into a heavier topic. So.
But I feel like they're both two very relevant heavy topics. I feel like it's, very important to keep an eye on what is happening, but also keep an eye on history, because you can kind of predict what will happen and how leaders will react to things based on historically. It's all kind of the same blueprint, essentially.
Absolutely. So, are you ready to talk about The Promise?
Yes.
Are you geared up for it emotionally? Oh. So The Promise came out in 2016. It is now on Netflix. It went up, I think, was it late last week, Maggie?
Mm-hmm. I believe it was
so
the 10th,
it should be, at
possibly.
least in the US. So if you're listening and you haven't seen it, it should be available for you to see if you have a Netflix subscription. It was directed by Terry George, who is also the writer and director of the movie Hotel Rwanda. And he also was the writer for, I mean, he's written and directed other movies as well, but I recently watched In the Name of the Father, which deals with it's a true story of Irish people who were wrongfully imprisoned by the English. So he is a writer and director who's very interested in sort of groups being marginalized by governments. And the film stars Oscar Isaac, Charlotte LeBun, I think is how it's pronounced, and Christian Bale. So some of me and Maggie's favorites. And it is, you know, kind of on the surface, it's about a love triangle, but it's also about kind of the beginning of the fall of the Ottoman Empire and about the Armenian genocide and kind of the events that led up to it and sort of what happened to Armenians within the Ottoman Empire in the 19-teens, as told through this story of this man and this love triangle. And it came out, its wide release was, I think, in April 2017, which was the 102nd anniversary of the week that the genocide officially started, I believe. Mm-hmm. And it bombed at the box office. It did pretty terribly. It made like $12 million compared to its like $90 to $100 million budget. But I'm going to talk a bit later on in the episode about why the film was made, why Terry George and the producers wanted to make it, and the fact that like economic gain was never really their goal. Yes. So that's perhaps not surprising, but partially because of that, we really wanted to draw attention to this movie and talk about it, and maybe try and help get some new eyes on it now, because I think it's definitely something that deserves to be seen.
Yes. I definitely was excited when I actually saw this like advertised back in 2016, and then like with everything that happened with like how the release happened, it just never was there for me to watch. And so when I saw Netflix advertising that it was coming out this month, I texted Nicole and I was like, Oscar Isaac and Christian Bale, sign me up. And, you know, recognizing that this is also a very heavy topic. You know, I really liked Christian Bale's character. At first, I was very worried that they were going to fall into this like familiar trope of like the love triangle and have him kind of become a bad character. I was really worried that he might, you know, turn against them in some way or something. So I was really happy that there was, you know, this respect for each other between Chris and Mikhail. And that was like a really refreshing change from the typical love triangle trope. You know, and I was really disappointed to see that so many reviews of the film focused on the love triangle and referenced the men being in battle for Anna's affections, because I didn't feel that way when I was watching the movie. That felt very much like, yeah, it's a draw to the film, but I felt like that was very much like a secondary element. Like I was more focused on like the story of the Armenian people and how that was being told. I'm also a huge fan of the actress who played Marta, and so I was really thrilled to see her in this movie. As soon as I heard her voice, I was like, wait a second, I recognize her. She was on 24 years ago, and then she pops up on a lot of shows. So it was nice to see her in another role. And I know you're going to talk about a certain scene yes, when you talk about it. But I was really thrilled with the way that Oscar Isaac is an amazing actor. Like his range of emotion is amazing. But I was really taken back by the scene where he shows this moment of like extreme grief when he finds his family dead, and just that raw primal, like I find it to be like it's a very hard emotion for actors to tap into naturally, because it almost seems like too much. But yes, if anybody has ever been in one of those moments, that is exactly how you react. Your entire body kind of caves in on itself, and like you're spitting and you're sobbing and it's this deep emotion. And I've only ever seen it done like one other time that well, and that was when I saw Adam Driver in Burn This as Pale, and that sort of like that primal cry is just like, it's so exciting to see an actor do that and have it come across so authentically. And so that was like a really powerful moment. But this film is heavy. It is heavy.
It's very heavy. The funny thing was, whenever I pulled this up on Netflix, you know how it'll tell you like if it thinks that that the film is a good match for you based on what you watch. I was a 98% match for this movie.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not exactly sure what their algorithm is to calculate that, but they were right. I mean, it was correct, but I thought that was pretty funny. Like Maggie, I was very impressed by Oscar Isaac in this movie. I mean, I will admit, like, he's one of my favorite actors. I think he is so talented and also very dreamy.
Yes.
And
So charming.
both of those things are definitely on display in this film. And I think that one thing that is nice is it's a very heavy movie, but at the same time, you do have this beginning section that's a bit lighter, and that you kind of get to see build those characters in a more comfortable world, I guess you might say, which is enjoyable. So it's not entirely like a dark, heavy movie that you can't like enjoy at all.
And in that way, it's almost darker because you have these people just living their lives, and you know what their hopes and their dreams and their plans, and you know they're having all these like social events, and they're playing with children and going to school, and it's so easy to see how life is normal one day and tomorrow it's never going to be the same.
Absolutely. It's also a really gorgeous movie, like especially in those beginning scenes where you've got this like there's those scenes where they go to like a club, and the costuming is gorgeous and the production design is gorgeous, and even in the later scenes, which are you know, a bit darker in even in coloring and a bit more, I don't know what you would say, like rustic. The countryside itself is really gorgeous in this movie, and I think it has some really nice moments of cinematography. I will say, I do think the film drags a little bit in the middle, and it is true, like if you go into this looking for a romance, I don't think the romance aspects of it are the most compelling.
They aren't.
I think that the love triangle is in many ways just a tool for the audience to get three separate perspectives on what's happening.
I agree.
And I think that it's kind of your entry point into this story to keep it from feeling too heavy, because I think if all they did was tell the story of the lead up to the Armenian genocide, it would be too dark, and like no one would ever want to watch it, if that makes sense. Like you have to give some sort of character element to connect with, I think. And I think that, you know, it does its job there. But so it's not a perfect movie, but I think it's also so rare to see a film like this that depicts the world that they're showing. I don't think I've ever watched a movie set in the 19-teens in this area of the world, particularly not an English language film.
No.
That it's very rare, and I think it's very commendable that they made this. And I also love that like you've got a character in the movie who isn't Armenian, he is Muslim. And he's a good character though. Like it doesn't try and pit this conflict as like, oh, well, all of the Ottomans who were Muslims were bad and the Armenians were good. It shows a very nuanced look at it. And I think that it's actually a really good entry point to learning about this conflict, to getting a better understanding of what happened, because it is actually remarkably, from what I found, accurate. Like there isn't anything big and glaring in it. We're not going to have one of those sections in this review where we're like, here's all the things that they did wrong, because they actually were pretty meticulous about being as faithful as they could to history while still also creating like a fictional narrative.
Oh yeah.
Which I thought was very impressive. And I also have to say there is a brief sex scene in this film.
Yes.
It's very brief. The film is rated PG-13. It's not explicit, but man, if it is not like the hottest thing I've seen in months.
I was like, because I saw it was PG-13. I was like, but I have seen those GIFs from this film.
Yeah.
And then I watched it and I was like, this is like the hottest yet tamest PG-13 sex scene I have seen in a while.
Like, I gotta give it to him. Also, I have to commend the director, Terry George, for the fact that it is a very hot sex scene while being very tame, but also not feeling exploitative at all of the woman in it.
It was just two people feeling emotions for each other.
It's beautiful. You might need like if you could get a little like spritz bottle of water for yourself before you watch it, like that could probably be helpful. But just be ready. But truly, like what I'm saying by bringing that up is like there's a little treat to make it worth your while. If you, like us, are interested in Oscar Isaac at all.
Yes.
So I wanted to start by kind of talking about the Armenians, because I think that if you don't know much about the Armenian genocide, you might not know much about them as a group of people at all. I feel like there's certainly something that's not often covered in American history teaching. I don't really know if in parts of Europe or other areas they're taught. I would imagine even in Turkey, it's pretty glossed over. But the Armenians are an ethnic group from the Armenian highlands in Asia. And there's currently a diaspora of about 5 million people who are in Russia, the United States, France, Georgia, Iran, Germany, the Ukraine, Lebanon, Brazil, and Syria. Obviously, some of these people kind of trickled out naturally into other Middle Eastern countries, but then a large amount of these people were displaced, particularly to the US, because of the Armenian genocide. And Maggie's going to talk more about that later, but I wanted to talk kind of just about the Armenians as a people. They speak Armenian, which has two forms, Eastern and Western Armenian, and does have its own alphabet, which I thought was really interesting. I think one of the key defining features is that they belong largely to the Armenian Apostolic Church, which is actually the world's oldest national church. Armenia was the first state to adopt Christianity as a state religion, and it was in the early 4th century. It was actually like very early on, which is really fascinating. I think that a lot of people who are Christians probably don't even know that.
That is true.
Right? Yeah, like that's not the kind of thing that you hear typically. Western Armenia came under Ottoman rule around 1300. And they remained a largely agricultural people until the early 20th century. As a culture, they're known for their architecture, painting, sculpture, and carpet weaving, which I thought was pretty cool. The Republic of Armenia, which is adjacent to Turkey and to Georgia, was created in 1991, and it currently has about 2.5 million people. Mm-hmm. And one thing I thought was interesting is we do have, a number of Armenian Americans, a lot of people who are descended from people who immigrated over to kind of escape the Armenian genocide. And some notable ones that I found whenever I was looking at this is Cher. Mm-hmm. Cher's father was Armenian American, and Kim Kardashian and her sisters, great-great-grandparents were Armenians who immigrated to America, which I would never have guessed. So I thought that was pretty interesting that, obviously we have a legacy of Armenians in the United States that I think a lot of us don't know about, which is sad, but I think, it's great whenever you see a film like this that kind of calls attention to a group of people that you might not think about normally.
Yes. And, when I was in university, I found out in a geography class of all classes that a large portion of my fellow classmates had never learned about the Armenian genocide. I know our educational system is lacking, but I was just shocked by how few people knew about it. I think maybe I learned about it because I was homeschooled, and my program that I used was a Christian program. And so they did focus a lot on persecution. So I think that might have been why the Armenian genocide was focused on so heavily. And now I get the task of consolidating a truly horrific reign of terror into a very short segment.
And I do want to butt in and just say a huge shout out to Maggie for putting all of this together. And also, it's obvious that there are things in this episode that we're probably going to leave out that we may, not cover. But we're trying to condense a very complicated subject into a short podcast. So please forgive us. But also, if there's any interesting information that you think we've left out, please let us know, because we're always happy to, highlight something in the next episode or just get to learn it ourselves. So if you know a lot about this topic, we would love to chat.
So it was set into motion in 1915, which was a year into World War I. But to fully understand the catalyst, we need to go back even further. This region has been steeped in religious war since the 11th century. The Christians and Muslims have been engaged in violence in Turkey since the Crusades. Prior to the genocide, the Ottoman Empire was actually in a period of relative peace. Historically, Armenia had been one of the most affluent and one of the largest kingdoms in the Middle East before falling to the hands of various conquerors, the last being the Ottoman Empire at the turn of the 20th century. It was not one single action that led up to the slaughter, but rather a long history of animosity coupled with racial, political, economic, and religious tensions. There was a group known as the Young Turks who formed in an effort to push reform and equality in Turkey. But as groups are often prone to do, they split into two fractions. The radical wing of the Young Turks promoted a Turkey for Turks sentiment, which created a xenophobic Turkish nationalism that heavily promoted dislike for the Armenians. It is purported by historians and hinted at in The Promise that one of the reasons for the slaughter was to gain wealth. World War I had been very difficult for the Ottoman Empire, and the Young Turks movement was running out of financial capital. They also alleged that their military defeats were due to bad actors from within, pointing fingers at the Armenians in order to sow seeds of discord. It wasn't just the military that participated in the slaughter. In fact, some of the first attacks against Armenians were from civilians acting on the propaganda that they had been fed by the country. Historians have noted that during World War II, Hitler actually followed the blueprint created by the Young Turks when he galvanized a population with propaganda against the Jewish community in Germany.
Oh, God.
He also used exact quotes about what happened to the Armenians as justification for his actions in Poland. Hitler stated, "Who, after all, speaks today about the annihilation of the Armenians?" Which was basically to say, no one really cared when this happened, so no one's going to care about what I've done here. Still today, Turkey takes no responsibility for the slaughter of the Armenians. They pretend that it didn't happen and that there was no crime if they do acknowledge that it happened. Some even suggest that the Armenians, quote unquote, decided their own fate. And just to highlight the sheer devastation of this mass murder that they pretend didn't happen, in 1915, there were approximately 1.5 million Armenians living within the Ottoman Empire. But by 1917, as many as 1.2 million of those people were dead. So that's just like a massive slaughter.
That's a hard number to even understand.
I read it and then I was like, wait, and I had to check just to make sure it wasn't a typo, because that seems like just like the sheer amount. And I cover my face because it's so hard to see recent stuff from Turkey dismissing that ever happened, and knowing that there's people who do the exact same thing about the Holocaust.
I think the thing that's even more difficult in some ways is that with the Holocaust, I feel like everyone kind of understands that, like, oh, there are Holocaust deniers and they're, crazy,
conspiracy
racist,
theorists,
whatever people. But I think that there are so many people who just don't know about the Armenian genocide.
And that was all to do with like how they pushed it.
When people say like, oh, that didn't happen, it's a lot easier for them to get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it really had to do with how Turkey marketed it, I guess. They acted like the Armenians did it to themselves, that they were, these horrible people that deserved to die, and they did it to themselves, and oh, well, they just starved to death. Like it was such a systematic and complete dismissal of their right to exist that it's just shocking. And as an aside, I think it's really important that we learn about this and other genocides that governments cover up and recognize the signs. Even today, you see the same dehumanizing propaganda take hold of entire countries. I mean, it's hard for me to log onto Facebook sometimes because there's people I know from a church that I used to go to that they post things that dehumanize entire groups of people. And I don't understand how we don't recognize these patterns and stop it before it happens. I think watching this movie, it was very hard not to sit there and watch and think about what's happening in Greece right now, what's happening at the border, what's happening with all of these people who are at risk, and we exploit that risk and kill them and let them die. It's just hard. This is my soapbox, and it's very hard to watch a film like this and recognize that there are people going through this right now. And Absolutely. It's 2020 and it shouldn't be happening. And I'm crying.
And I think that what's particularly difficult too with something like this is I feel like a lot of people know about the Holocaust. They know about Rwanda. But to think that this happened to a people and that they got away with it so well that even well-educated people aren't aware that it happened, I think is really kind of difficult to come to terms with. But I also think that is somewhere that filmmakers and people like us can call attention to things like this and hope to reach people who might not have learned about it in school, but might watch this movie on Netflix and be interested in looking up more about it. To kind of build off of that, I looked into kind of why the film was made. And essentially, this film was made to educate audiences about this thing that happened in history, about the lead up to the Armenian genocide, through telling this story. And Terry George, the director, said audiences learn more from films today than they do from history books. And I do think that that's actually probably an overwhelmingly true statement. Whenever you talk about like the general populace, and in particular adults who aren't, in school anymore, which that's part of why I think Maggie and I do what I do, is to be able to look at a period drama and tell people who are interested what of that is true and what isn't, so that they're not walking around with false information. And Terry George discovered the topic of the Armenian genocide while he was doing research for Hotel Rwanda, and he traveled to Turkey and he traveled to Armenia to do more research. One of the producers of the film, whose name I believe is Eric, is Israelian. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm very sorry if I'm not. Had great grandparents who lived through the Armenian genocide, is what I read. And so he was also very passionate about getting this project off the ground. Now, what's really interesting is the entire funding for this film, I read, was donated by an Armenian American, Kerkorian, yeah. Yeah, who was an American businessman, but who had Armenian roots. And he essentially gave them the entire, I don't remember if it's actually 90 or 100 million. I saw both numbers used, to make the movie so that they could help escape getting shut down. Because while they were making this, they were actually very concerned that the Turkish government was going to try and shut down the film. I thought that was really interesting. Obviously the Turkish government still denies that the Armenian genocide happened. And so they were concerned that they might get shut down. They were concerned actually that they might try and corrupt the footage, something like that, to make sure that it wasn't seen. But luckily enough, they didn't have any of those issues. And what's also really interesting is that they did a lot of things to try and make this movie accessible to audiences. I read something saying that it purposely has a 1970s feel to it, like in terms of films made in that era, to help it be more accessible to audiences. And so the audience, and that's also part of why the love triangle is there, is to kind of connect it to films like something like Dr. Zhivago, which is another love story set at war.
Yes.
To be able to give audiences an easy entryway into it, which I think is a really fascinating idea. And we see this sometimes too with movies set during the Holocaust, things like that, giving us a little bit of romance to kind of bring us in and then be able to impart all of this information more. They also ensured that it would have a PG-13 rating because they wanted younger people to be able to go and see it. Which is, I think, really impressive in a film like this that not only has some sexual content, but the amount of violence that there is in it, they were able to make sure that they stayed on the side of PG-13 and not R, because it was very important to them that as many people could see it as possible. I imagine this also makes it easier to show in a classroom if a teacher wanted to do that. But like I said before, the film is seen as being remarkably historically accurate because obviously they were actually setting out to tell not a true story in terms of the narrative, but to share facts. One thing that's interesting, and I haven't watched this yet, but I do want to try and get my hands on it. There's a documentary called Intent to Destroy, Death, Denial, and Depiction, which is about the Armenian genocide, and it was directed by Joe Berlinger, and it was also produced by Israelian, and they used the same crew from the movie. Whenever they finished the movie, they moved on to the documentary, and it's kind of a companion piece to the film in many ways. So I definitely want to watch that. I didn't get a chance to watch it yet, but I think I feel like a very good sign of how committed to truth they were with this is the fact that they not only made this movie, but they also, some of the people involved went on to work on the documentary. I also thought it was interesting. Whenever I was reading about this, I came across this movie, which I had heard of before, called The Ottoman Lieutenant.
Yeah, I've heard of that as well.
Which came out in 2017. And this movie has been compared to it because whereas The Promise kind of shines a light on the lead up to the Armenian genocide and what happened to the Armenian people, The Ottoman Lieutenant, from everything I read, seems to deny that it happened.
Yeah, I saw those same reviews and I was like, pass.
So maybe just a thought that if you thought maybe you wanted to watch that movie, don't. Or at least don't pay for it. Because, I think that also is a huge testament to what we've talked about before, which is that there are still people trying to deny that this happened today. And there are literally people making movies trying to say that.
And it's such a shame because that movie has Michael Huisman in it, who I love.
Yep.
And I had that on my list, and then I saw that it has like a 1-star rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah.
And the reviews are fairly damning.
Yeah, so definitely one to avoid, I think. I would definitely recommend watching this film over that. I also would just recommend watching this film in general, both for educational purposes and also, I do think it's a good film on its own, even if you take out the whole context of it. But
yeah, I'm still very confused as to why this film flopped. And I do wonder if there is some element of the Turkish government or those that wish to deny it that did something to suppress the hype for it, because it seems like the perfect film.
I also wonder if it's the fact that it's not a very well-known event that it's based around.
Yeah.
Maybe that kind of failed to capture attention. I don't know. It's also I feel like often why a film flops is so dependent on so many factors, and often has to do with what else was coming out at the time and what the studios were pushing over other things.
Yeah, this is true.
The amount of films that you find out flopped, and then it's like, well, why did it flop? Why didn't it do well? And it's because Harvey did that to it, is astounding. But I do really hope that now that it's on Netflix, more people are going to see it, that more people are going to get recommended it and they're going to watch it, maybe not knowing what it is, because I really think it's well worth watching. And like I said, I wouldn't call it a perfect movie. I do think it has a few issues.
Yeah.
But it is a good movie. And it also, I think, is a really important film.
I also found out that The Promise, one of the first film festivals that it appeared at. So I think its first release was at TIFF and its second release was at the Virginia Film Festival.
Oh, that's fun.
Yes. So I thought that was kind of neat to see that. I mean, I still mourn the Virginia film industry, but it was nice to see that something like this was here. Had no idea.
That's really cool.
But yeah, I mean, if you've listened to this and you haven't seen it yet, and I really hope that despite how heavy and sad this film is, that you will want to watch it because it's a beautiful film. The costumes are beautiful. Kind of segueing into that a little bit, but Unfortunately, when a film flops, there is not a lot of press after the fact to gather information about the production design. And this is one of those films that there is a lot of lacking interviews, videos. I can't find almost anything about the costuming. So that is one of the reasons why this episode is going to be lacking a lot of what I usually talk about with costumes. It is a movie that is designed by the costume designer who did the Three Musketeers, which we talked about earlier. So Pierre-Yves Guéroud. He also did the costumes for Matt Damon in Bourne Identity. Sorry, Nicole.
I can't escape that man.
You can't. I was looking up the costume and I was like, wait, am I looking up the Three Musketeers accidentally? And I was like, nope. Same costume designer.
That's funny. They're much better here. They're
so much better. So he also did the Perfume Story of a Murder.
Oh.
I don't know if you've seen that film. I watched that years ago. It used to be very popular in the Harry Potter fandom because they would use the girl as Lily in fan videos.
I remember that.
Because she's got beautiful red hair. And so I watched that film years ago. And when I was actually watching The Promise, there was some dress that Anna had on that for some reason the fabric or the shape, something reminded me of that movie. Completely different time period. But something made me think of it. And so when I was looking up what he's worked on, I was like, oh, who's the costume designer for that as well?
Sense. Yeah.
That makes sense. It's very subtle things that once you start looking at costumes, especially period pieces, even if they span a variety of time periods, you start to recognize certain little things about styling and how the costumers like to represent their scenes. There's a great dichotomy in these costumes as well, which you touched on a little bit as in terms of like story structure being very light at the beginning. Everyone's very well dressed and they're on Vogue, and Anna's very well dressed because she's very traveled and she's been around and she's not just stayed right there. So she's got these great costumes, and it's very interesting to watch this transition as things get very serious very fast, and this heaviness kind of settles into the costume styles, and the costumes are very readier and they're simpler and they're basic pieces because they're on the move. They're trying to get away with their lives. And so it's very interesting to see how it goes. And like everybody's very well dressed and very well, they look very fancy when they're out, having a good time in the evening. And that transition is very obviously meant to match that tone shift. And so I thought that was very nice.
I think it does a really good job of it too. And I think that sometimes whenever you see that in a film, I feel like either one of the or the other is better. Mm-hmm. Like you feel like, oh, the costume designer wasn't really good at the more basic clothing. Like the fancy pieces look great, but I feel like it was really evenly matched here. They both felt really real. I also the clothing whenever they're like on the run and stuff felt very lived in.
Yes.
We've talked about like with the Three Musketeers where it was like
so pristine.
Yeah, it was like you don't look like you've actually walked down that dusty road. Definitely not the same issues here. I thought it was, very nice costume work. If I was doing like a ballot for this year, I would probably put it on it. I thought it was really nice. And I also thought there was some really nice hair as well.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, I loved all of the costumes that Oscar wore.
Yes.
They suited him very well. Especially there was a suit that had like a very small pinstripe in it. And I really liked that one.
I know exactly the one that you're talking about.
Yes. It looked everything was just very, very fitted and very, I don't know how to like verbalize this like the way I want to. It just, everything seemed authentic. Sometimes people will seem out of place in certain period costumes, even early 20th century. It's the weirdest thing. There are certain people who just have faces and bodies that don't look like they fit into a certain time period.
Ben Affleck.
Yes. Matt Damon.
Yes.
There's just certain people that just don't possess this.
Emma Stone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's an issue. And there was something about the casting of this film. Christian Bale fits any time period. That man, I love him. I do not want to hear a bad word about him. I'm a huge fan of him. And I thought his costumes looked fantastic on him. There's so many films that he's been in that are period pieces, and he
pulls it all off.
Very specific periods. And Oscar as well. I mean, he suited this. It was a very good very good sampling of costuming for that time. And this is such an interesting period of time as well, because you usually only see this time framed around World War One and what's going on in other parts of the world. So it was very nice to see this taste of Turkey.
I also thought it was really interesting because you do see these people and you see more traditional clothing that is more traditionally Armenian or Turkish, but then you also see the influence of the Western world and the fact that these, you know, cultures are kind of exchanging. And like, you know, Anna has come back from living in France, and so a lot of her clothing is quite European influence.
Yes.
And kind of the
even her
blending
hair
of that. Yeah. And I really liked seeing the blending of that, because I do think that often you have this thought of the Middle East kind of being separate from the West in this time period, but it very much wasn't. And there was a lot of flow between them already at this time. And I think it does a good job of showing that through the costume design.
Yes. And I know this isn't in our notes, but I felt like we should at least mention the end of the film.
Oh my God.
I liked it. I saw a lot of reviews where everybody was like, it was cheesy. And I was like, but it felt so right. And I loved that there was such a respect still between the two men when he talks about Chris. Like they kept in touch. And I felt like that was such a poignant thing, because so often you get these films with love triangles and there's always animosity, unnecessary animosity. And this felt like such a natural, like, understanding and respect in a time of extreme strife where like contrived love triangle drama would have felt so out of place for something so serious.
I will say there is some old age makeup at the end that could have been better. Could have been better, but
it was special.
They tried. But I think that, like, I agree. I didn't think it was overly cheesy. It was maybe a tad sentimental, but
yes,
it felt like a nice, I don't want to say break, but like almost like a nice like relief from the heaviness of the third act of the film.
Yes.
I think that what this ending shows too is that the Armenian people have been able to persevere, and even though they've gone through so much tragedy and, you know, all this animosity and all this horrible thing, that they've been able to persevere, and that there are pockets of them still in the world, and that the culture has survived. And one thing I didn't mention earlier is that they made a conscious decision to make the movie in English so that American audiences
would watch
it and would be able to, you know, feel it was more accessible to them. But the ending is the one place where you do actually hear Armenian in the film.
Yes.
And I think that feels it felt to me very meaningful whenever it happened.
Yes. I know when I saw that, my thought was I was sobbing like a baby. It's really hard not to compare it to the Holocaust and to compare it to, and that's because the Holocaust is something that we are all so intimately familiar with. And I felt like it was a sentiment that I've heard from descendants of Holocaust survivors, where it's we survived despite what you did. We survived. We have had families, and we have had families who have had families, and like we are still here. And I felt like that was the sentiment that they were trying to get across. Like, you tried to kill us, but we're still here.
Absolutely.
And so that's what I got from that moment. And I loved that was the only time that Armenian was actually spoken, because that kind of continued that idea of we're still here and our culture is still here. Like you didn't kill all of us.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. Well, I mean, enjoy feels like a weird word to use, but yes. I enjoyed parts of it. I definitely recommend that people watch it if they're listening. They haven't seen it yet. And I'm really happy that Netflix got it and has put it up on their platform, because I would love to see them kind of make an effort to have more diverse stories, in their library.
Yeah. And, in segueing away from talking about the movie, segues are so hard for us on the show, because usually we're like in the thick of describing something like either really serious or like getting into the nitty gritty details. And we're like, okay, well, we're almost done. So let's transition. I don't know. Do we need like transition music? Like, hit us up with ideas. But we have an Etsy shop. I am in the throes of quarantine madness. After 6 months, it's finally hit me that I have been in my house for 6 months. So I've been starting to branch out into new creative ventures. And one of my creative ventures was to set up Petticoats and Poppies with our very own Etsy shop. We currently only have small stickers with our logo on it. But I mean, if anyone has any like quotes or ideas, hit us up. I'm pretty quick at coming up with stuff, especially if somebody like kind of prompts me. I mean, I'm contemplating putting some Matt Damon riding an artichoke stickers up on the shop just because it was too funny. It was like my second sketch.
Maggie's a very, very good artist. She's been doing a lot of practice. And let us know if there's a quote, if there's maybe if there's something related to a specific film that we've reviewed that you would like to see, something podcast related. Let us know, because Maggie can probably make it happen. Like, I give her full credit for this. I'm just here to say, yes, we should do it.
That's why we haven't done the Matt Damon sticker yet.
Yeah. If anyone wants it, please let us know, because like we will make it and sell it to you.
Seriously, I mean, where else can you find Matt Damon riding an artichoke?
I'm fairly certain there's nowhere else.
I feel like I need to send that to Matt Damon with no explanation.
Oh my God, just like his people get it in the mail and they're like, excuse me?
What? But I did want to shout out to Brandon, who was our first customer. He bought 2 stickers from us and I was super excited. Like, I might have danced around my room because I was really excited.
We were thrilled. So thank you very much, Brandon. And Brandon has been a great supporter of the podcast on Twitter and listening. So a huge shout out to him.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much to listening to our 8th episode of Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. I can't believe we are already on episode 8.
It's insanity. We would love to hear from you on social media and to hear what you think about The Promise. We'd also love for you to send us any films that you would like us to review.
You can find us on social media at HGATM Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also find us if you search Petticoats and Poppies on Etsy. That's how you can get to our Etsy shop. And you can find Maggie at Maggie of the Town and me, Nicole, at Nicole Ackman 16 on Twitter.
You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or on the Earglue Media website. If you like what you hear, don't forget to leave us a rating on Apple Podcast or over on Podchaser. Every other episode, we'll be reading our podcast reviews, so be sure to leave us one if you want to be featured.
We'll be back with another exciting episode as we continue to look at period films from a history and film perspective. Until then, stay safe, make sure that you know how you're going to vote, and stay healthy.
And mail something in the postal service this week. You've been listening to Petticoats and Poppies,
History Girls at the Movies.
Matt Damon.
Ben Affleck.
Matt Damon riding an artichoke.
Yes.